Margaret Vale heard her brothers divide their father's life, where the clay on his coffin had settled. They stood in the stone yard behind Vale and Sons, where the November rain had silvered the heaps of dressed gritstone and darkened the wooden cranes. Alfred, the elder by 3 years, had already put Edwin Vale's brass measuring rule into his own coat. Hugh carried the ring of workshop keys. Neither man had asked Margaret to remain after the burial, but she had returned for the canvas roll of tools her father had kept beneath the long bench: mallet, chisels, plumb bob, folding rule, and the narrow pointing iron worn bright by his hand. Alfred placed his boot on the roll before she could lift it. "Those belong to the firm." "They were left beneath my stool," Margaret said. "Your stool is firewood now." Hugh glanced toward the 4 masons who pretended to sort wedges by the shed. "Father indulged you. That did not make you a partner." At 29, Margaret had spent 18 years learning the speech of stone beside Edwin Vale. He had taught her to read a wall from its settlement cracks, to hear hollowness beneath plaster, and to distrust a building that looked too straight. He had also taught her, mostly by silence, what the Vale name could cost a daughter born 6 months before his marriage to Alfred and Hugh's mother. In private, he called her his best eye. In public, she was Miss Margaret Reed, the late housekeeper's child who kept accounts and sharpened tools. The workshop solicitor, Mr. Pell, arrived beneath a black umbrella. He carried a narrow deed box and avoided Margaret's eyes. "There is one remaining provision." The brothers exchanged a look too quickly. In the office, where Edwin's wet greatcoat still hung behind the door, Pell read the clause. Alfred received the house and controlling interest in the stoneworks. Hugh received the southern quarry leases. Margaret received Bellweather Hotel, together with its fixtures, grounds, liabilities, unpaid parish rates, and all rights described in a deed dated March 1848. Hugh laughed first. Bellweather had been built when the High-Fell Railway promised to turn the valley into a fashionable stopping place. The line had altered its route, the station had closed, and a landslip had severed the eastern approach 17 years earlier. The hotel stood empty above Brackencoombe, its roof failing and its rates worth more than its rent. "Father always did have a sense of proportion," Alfred said. "The business to his sons, a ruin to—" He stopped before saying what Margaret was. Pell laid a folded memorandum beside the deed. It contained Edwin's spare words. "Bellweather is yours in your own right. Trust your line before another man's word." Margaret's throat tightened, but she would not give her brothers the pleasure of seeing it. She took the deed. Its outer description named the hotel, stable yard, kitchen garden, and a strip running from the western boundary to the old railway retaining wall and all ground, ways, waters, and works thereunder. "Why does the boundary run beneath the railway?" she asked. Alfred smiled without warmth. "A clerk's flourish. The railway owns its permanent way." "Then you will not object if I keep it?" His smile disappeared. "Keep the ruin, but remove yourself and your mother's effects from our house by Monday." Margaret possessed 7 shillings and 4 pence, 2 plain dresses, a winter cloak, her mother's tin trunk, and no legal right to the room in which she had slept for 26 years. Pell released the workshop tools only after she showed him Edwin's memorandum and identified the small M cut inside the canvas flap. Before dusk, she hired Daniel Croft, a widowed carter, to carry her and the trunk to Brackencoombe for 3 shillings. She spent another 6 pence on bread, cheese, candles, and lamp oil. The calculation left her frightened enough to feel ill, but not uncertain. As the cart passed the stone yard gate, Alfred called after her, "If you sign Bellweather over within a week, I may settle the rates and find you a position." Margaret looked at the workshop where her drawings had been copied under her brother's initials and her estimates presented as theirs. "I have had a position," she said. "What I require is ownership." The road climbed north through wet pasture and bare ash woods. By 4 o'clock, daylight had thinned to iron gray. Bellweather appeared above the valley like a stranded ship. 3 stories of soot-streaked stone, a slate roof sagging at the center, and a veranda stripped of half its ironwork. 24 dark windows faced the vanished station. Behind it, the hillside rose steeply toward the abandoned rail cutting. The western service wing had lost its gutter, and water had carved a green scar down the wall. Daniel stopped at the gate. "Village says the place swallowed a porter in '59. Buildings do not swallow men. Debts do." He helped carry her trunk into the entrance hall, then refused extra payment she could not afford. "My wife scrubbed floors here before the closing. Kitchen chimney drew well, if the birds have not claimed it." The air inside smelled of damp plaster, mouse nests, and old coal. Margaret chose the former porter's room near the kitchen because its ceiling was intact. She barred the outer door with a length of fallen banister, cleared the hearth, and tested the flue with a twist of burning paper before making a small fire from broken laths. Wind moved through the upper corridors with the long breath of a sleeping animal. She ate bread beside the hearth and unfolded the 1848 deed. The ink was faded but legible. Bellweather's western frontage measured 112 feet. At first light, she paced the entrance hall and 2 principal rooms, then used Edwin's folding rule along the exterior plinth. Outside, from corner coin to corner coin, the frontage measured 112 feet. Inside, allowing for wall thickness, the rooms accounted for only 99. She repeated the work twice. At the north end of the first-floor corridor stood room 12, its faded number still fixed to the door. Its inner wall sounded solid beneath her knuckles. Yet when she dropped the plumb bob, the line showed the wall leaning inward nearly 2 inches from ceiling to floor, while the exterior masonry remained true. The building was not merely settling. 13 feet had been deliberately removed from its interior plan. That night, as rain struck the broken veranda, Margaret lay beneath her cloak in the porter's room and heard 3 measured knocks from somewhere above. Pause, then 2 more. In the morning, she found fresh mud on the hall tiles. Brackencoombe consisted of a church, an inn, a smithy, 2 rows of quarry cottages, and a station building converted into a feed store. Margaret went first to the parish clerk, who confirmed that Bellweather owed £2 11 shillings in rates. The parish would seek an order of sale in 6 weeks unless she paid at least £1 and agreed to installments. "No one will lend on it," Mr. Beale said, not unkindly. "The roof alone would eat £50. I need 1 dry room I can let, not a new roof." At the smithy she met Samuel Pike, a railway plate layer dismissed when the branch closed. He was 60, broad-handed and suspicious of every Vale. When Margaret asked about the hotel, he said Edwin's firm had supplied its stone and later built the retaining wall behind the line. "Your father measured that wall after it shifted," Pike said. "Then company men came and told us he had measured wrongly." "Did he?" Edwin Vale could be cowardly before gentlemen, never careless before stone. Margaret accepted the judgment because it was true. Pike told her the missing porter, Joseph Bell, had been blamed for stealing payroll funds shortly before the station closed. His wife and young daughter had left the valley in disgrace. No body had ever been found. When she returned, a smart dog cart stood before Bellweather. Mr. Lionel Rusk, land agent for Northmere Minerals, waited in the hall. His gloves were pale, his boots spotless, and his concern rehearsed. Northmere intended to purchase abandoned plots along the rail corridor for a stone-crushing works. He offered Margaret £12 for the hotel, enough to pay the rates and begin elsewhere. "Why buy a building you must demolish?" she asked. "For access. The landslip blocks the eastern road. We would restore it." Margaret noticed his gaze travel not toward the road, but to the northern wall and the stair. "I will consider the offer after I understand what I own." Rusk's expression remained courteous. Ownership is sometimes less comforting when fully understood. After he left, she found the first-floor plaster beside room 12 scored by a fresh pry bar. The muddy intruder had searched the wall before offering to buy it. Margaret made survival her first repair. The kitchen roof leaked at 2 valleys, but the old laundry beside it had sound rafters. With Pike's reluctant help, she removed loose slates above the porter's room, laid tarred felt purchased on credit, and reset usable slates over the smallest area. Daniel's 15-year-old daughter, Elsie, came to sweep for meals and watched Margaret rebuild a fallen section of hearth. "Women don't dress stone," Elsie said. "Stone has never objected." Margaret showed her how lime mortar must remain softer than the surrounding grit stone, so moisture could escape through the joint rather than split the face. The work mattered because Edwin had taught it to her, and because teaching transformed his private acknowledgement into something no brother could erase. Within 9 days, the porter's room, laundry, and kitchen were dry enough for occupation. Daniel knew 2 surveyors assessing a new county road. Margaret rented them the laundry for 4 shillings a week with breakfast. She drew measured plans for a farmer's barn repair and earned 12 shillings. She paid £1 toward the rates before the clerk expected it. Opinion in the village did not soften all at once. The innkeeper still called Bellweather a folly. The butcher refused credit. But Mrs. Pike brought a crock of broth after Margaret repaired her doorstep, without charge. And Elsie began arriving with her hair pinned up, as if reporting to a profession. The hidden width remained. Margaret removed paper from room 12's inner wall and found plaster over brick, though every other partition on that floor used lath. Near the skirting, beneath several coats of paint, were Edwin's chisel marks. 1 long cut, 2 short. They matched the rhythm of the knocks she had heard. She tested each course with the wooden handle of her pointing iron. The sound changed beside the hearth. When she scraped away plaster, she exposed an iron strap set vertically into the brickwork. It was not a structural tie. Halfway up, a rounded knuckle emerged, a hinge buried beneath mortar. Someone had built a door and then disguised it as a wall. Before opening it, Margaret checked the floor below. A sealed doorway could support loose masonry or conceal a shaft. In the dining room beneath room 12, the ceiling beams ran uninterrupted, but the northern chimney breast was broader than the fireplaces required. A ventilation grill near the skirting carried a faint current of cold air smelling not of soot, but wet iron. Pike examined the grill. There was an old passage between the hotel cellars and station parcels office. Porters used it in snow. It does not appear on the hotel plan. Company removed it from plans after Bell vanished. Margaret asked where plans might survive. Pike named the former station master, Arthur Sennett, now living with a nephew 12 miles away. He also warned her that Rusk had been asking whether she had opened the north wall. They began carefully. Margaret cut out mortar around the buried hinge and found a second at shoulder height. The false door opened inward only an inch before striking rubble. Through the crack came a colder draft and the odor of oiled metal. She enlarged the opening by removing bricks one at a time, numbering each in chalk. Behind them lay a narrow chamber no wider than a railway compartment, its ceiling supported by stone corbels. It contained no gold, no jewels, and no answer easy enough to solve her troubles. There was a surveyor's tripod without its instrument, a broken hand lamp, 6 slate templates marked with curves, and a zinc cylinder sealed with wax. Moisture had corroded the cylinder's lid. Margaret carried it to the dry kitchen and spent an hour easing it open without tearing what lay within. The cylinder held a rolled tracing cloth. On it, in Edwin's unmistakable block lettering, was a cross-section of Bellweather, the railway embankment, and the retaining wall. A diagonal line marked an older masonry conduit beneath them. Beside it he had written, "Original foundation sound. Later wall bears upon roof of bell passage. Settlement not natural. Refer J.B. setting book." At the bottom was a date in 1860, a year after Joseph Bell disappeared. Pike stared at the plan. They knew the passage was there when they built the retaining wall. My father knew. Knowing and speaking are different labors. Margaret flinched. Her father had preserved evidence, then hidden it. Whether from fear or guilt, she could not yet tell. The slate templates formed segments of an arch. Their radii corresponded not to any hotel doorway, but to the conduit beneath the railway. One bore a small stamp. B&D Cooperative Quarry, Brackencombe. Pike had never heard of such a concern. The valley's quarries, he said, had belonged first to the railway's chairman, Sir Claudius Northmere, and later to Northmere Minerals. Margaret placed the templates in order. The mason who cut them had pricked tiny numbers along the edges. Read clockwise, they gave distances: 42 feet west, 9 feet down, 6 feet north. They were setting marks, a practical code no clerk or hotel guest would recognize. The measurements converged beneath the old railway retaining wall. That evening, a stone smashed through the kitchen window. Wrapped around it was a parish notice claiming Bellweather had been declared structurally dangerous and must be vacated within 48 hours. Margaret carried it to Mr. Beale the next morning. He recognized the seal but not the wording. No such order had been issued. The forgery was crude because its maker assumed a frightened woman would obey without asking. Margaret kept the notice. It was the first mistake her adversary had left in her hands. Rusk returned before noon with a constable and the same grave civility. He said Northmere had received reports that Margaret was tunneling beneath company land and endangering the abandoned permanent way. The constable, embarrassed, admitted he had no warrant to search the hotel. Margaret showed him the false notice and asked him to compare its purple sealing wax with the wax on Rusk's document case. Rusk laughed at the suggestion, but he put the case behind his coat. "I have opened a wall entirely within my house," she said. "If your employer disputes the boundary, he may produce his deed." "He will produce more than that." Rusk turned at the door. "Your father understood the cost of confusing workmanship with authority." The remark gave Margaret something more useful than anger. Rusk knew Edwin had found the passage, but not what Edwin had hidden. Northmere's knowledge was incomplete, and that made it dangerous. Margaret and Pike traveled to Arthur Sennett's cottage in Daniel's cart. The former station master was 81 and nearly blind. At first, he refused to discuss Joseph Bell. Then Margaret put Edwin's tracing cloth beneath his fingers and read the notation aloud. "Edwin came to me after the wall moved," Sennett said. "Asked for Bell's setting book. I told him it had burned." "Had it?" "No," Shame bowed his head. "Sir Claudius dismissed Bell as a thief, said the payroll box vanished through the service passage. But Bell had discovered the quarry accounts were false. The men paid a penny from every shilling into a cooperative fund. Northmere promised them shares in the lower quarry. The money went into his company instead." Sennett had seen Bell hide papers in the passage on the night he disappeared. Days later, railway laborers sealed both entrances and spread the story of theft. Sennett kept one station diagram because Bell's wife begged him to preserve something. He had concealed it inside the backboard of an old timetable frame. The diagram showed the service passage running from Bellweather's north cellar beneath the platform, then dividing. One branch reached the parcels office, the other ended at a chamber labeled Mason's Store beneath the retaining wall. A penciled X marked a ventilation shaft in the hotel's stable yard. "Why did no one find it?" Margaret asked. The hotel cellar entrance was hidden behind the wine bins. The station entrance went under the landslip. Edwin tried the shaft, but the capstone had been mortared. He told me the new wall was crushing the passage and opening it might bring half the bank down. Why hide his survey in room 12? Because Sir Claudius's solicitor took the original and threatened to ruin your father for defective work. Edwin had a new wife, 2 sons, and a business borrowed to its limit. Sennett turned his clouded gaze toward her. He said one day he would put it right. Men say that when they mean to make time wait for their courage. Margaret left with the diagram and a complicated grief. Her father had not invented the injustice, but he had helped silence it. The ruined hotel was not a joke bequeathed to an unwanted daughter. It was a delayed confession, entrusted to the one child trained to understand it. The ventilation shaft lay beneath nettles in the stable yard. Margaret found its square capstone by probing with an iron rod. Edwin's chisel marks appeared along one edge, but so did a warning cut used by masons to indicate load. She refused Pike's suggestion to lever it at once. First, they shored the hidden chamber, traced the bearing wall through the cellars, and dug a narrow inspection trench beside the exterior foundation. The work took 12 days and nearly all Margaret's earnings. Rain slowed the digging, frozen nights hardened the spoil. One of her road surveyors left when Rusk warned him the hotel might collapse. The remaining lodger, Mr. Owlett, paid another week in advance. Elsie enlisted her father to cut oak shores. Mrs. Pike persuaded the churchwarden to lend 2 screwjacks. Their help was not faith in a promised treasure. It was confidence earned by watching Margaret refuse dangerous haste. At the end of the trench, she found the conduit arch. Its crown stones were cracked but held. The retaining wall above had indeed been built partly upon it, yet the old masons had formed relieving arches in 2 places. If Margaret entered through the ventilation shaft and kept clear of the failed eastern bay, the passage could be examined without disturbing the railway wall. They lifted the capstone on a cold December morning. Stale air rose from darkness. Margaret lowered a candle first. The flame continued to burn. She tied a rope around her waist, took a shielded lamp, and descended iron rungs furred with rust. The passage was lined in dressed stone. Water reached her ankles but flowed westward through a narrow channel. 20 feet in, a fall of brick blocked the station branch. The other route continued beneath the bank. On the wall, low enough for a mason at work, were small triangular marks matching the slate templates. The first chamber stood open. Shelves had collapsed into mud, and wooden tool chests had rotted. Against the far wall lay an iron payroll box with its lock broken. It was empty. Margaret's heart sank, not because she expected money, but because an empty, stolen box seemed to confirm the accusation against Bell. Then she noticed its underside. Stone dust had preserved 4 clean rectangles where the box had once rested on timber battens. It had remained in the chamber for years, perhaps until someone entered from the station side after the passage was sealed. Bell could not have fled carrying it if the box stayed behind. Near it, Pike uncovered brass uniform buttons and a decayed leather strap. Beneath a fallen shelf, Margaret found a pocket watch stopped at 2:17. The case was engraved J. Bell. Pike crossed himself. Then he never left. Margaret studied the floor. No human remains lay in the chamber, and the water channel continued beneath a low arch toward the failed bay. Drag marks in hardened lime residue led that way. She would not crawl under cracked masonry without additional shoring. On the west wall, one stone differed from the rest. Its face had been laid backward, rough tail outward, and its joint was packed with hard Roman cement rather than lime. Margaret recognized a deliberate closure. Removing it exposed a dry recess lined with sheet lead. Inside were 3 oilskin packets, a mason's setting book, and a miniature wooden model of a self-locking quarry tram brake. The setting book belonged to Beatrice Dunn, whose initials matched the cooperative quarry stamp. Its pages recorded stone dimensions, worker contributions, and construction hours. Beatrice, described in one note as designer and clerk, had developed the brake with Joseph Bell to prevent loaded quarry wagons running backward on steep inclines. The cooperative intended to patent it and use profits from safer hauling to purchase the lower quarry for its contributing workers. The packets contained contribution receipts bearing more than 80 thumbprints and signatures, letters between Bell and Beatrice, and a draft agreement. But the executed deed conveying the quarry rights was absent. Without it, the records proved fraud and invention, not ownership. The final page of the setting book read, "Deed and patent receipt placed beyond the false Springer, where only the line shows the honest course." Pike looked at the arches. Which stone is false? Margaret could not answer. Every visible Springer appeared to carry weight, and taking out the wrong one could kill them. They removed the documents and resealed the shaft each night. Margaret copied every page by hand. She sent one copy of the contribution list to Pell, with instructions to deposit it at his office and another to Sennett's nephew. She retained the originals in the zinc cylinder beneath a loose kitchen flag, a hiding place chosen not for romance, but because damp would betray any disturbance in the surrounding sand. 2 days later, Alfred arrived. He had learned about Northmere's offer and proposed what he called a family settlement. £20, the rates paid, and employment keeping the stoneworks accounts if she conveyed Bellweather to Vale and Sons. Rusk offered 12, Margaret said. You have valued brotherly concern at £8. Alfred paced the repaired kitchen. Northmere has placed a large order with us. They require access through the hotel grounds. To the passage? He stopped. That was answer enough. Margaret showed him Edwin's tracing, but not the setting book. Alfred recognized the cross-section. He admitted Edwin had kept duplicate quarry surveys in the workshop strongroom. After the funeral, Hugh had found a letter from Rusk asking whether the Bell instruments survived. They burned the papers they did not understand and offered the hotel before Margaret could investigate. You destroyed father's records to secure an order? To secure 40 men's wages through winter. You secured your control of them. Alfred's face hardened. He told her Northmere's lawyers would prove the 1848 hotel deed defective. More quietly, he warned that Hugh had borrowed against the stoneworks and could not survive the loss of the order. Margaret saw then that Alfred's public mask, responsible son, guardian of laborers, concealed a private terror of becoming as dependent as the sister he despised. Give me Edwin's remaining survey books, she said, and testify that Rusk sought the passage before you knew what it held. Then I will distinguish the firm's honest debts from your deception. He refused. Yet at the door he said, Hugh will not merely argue. The warning came true on the longest night of the year. Smoke woke Margaret shortly after 2. Fire had taken the west service stairs, where oily rags had been pushed beneath dry paneling. The blaze separated the porter's room from the front door. Margaret shouted for Mr. Owlett and Elsie, who had stayed because snow made the road home unsafe. They crossed the laundry roof through a window while Margaret beat back sparks long enough to reach the kitchen. The loose flag had been raised. The zinc cylinder was gone. She pursued no thief into a burning corridor. She carried a bucket line with Elsie and Owlett from the scullery pump until Daniel and the Pikes arrived. Snow on the roof slowed the flames, and the stone partition held. By dawn, the service stair and 3 rooms were gutted, but the main roof survived. The constable found a Northmere match safe outside the kitchen window. It was too obvious, almost placed to be found. Margaret remembered Hugh's debts and Alfred's warning. Rusk had motive to steal the evidence. Hugh had motive to frame Rusk while destroying it. Her copied pages remained safe, but copies could be challenged. The original contribution book, letters, and receipts had vanished. Worse, smoke damage emptied her rentable rooms, and the parish clerk could not suspend the next rate payment. Margaret stood in the blackened kitchen with 3 shillings left and understood that competence did not prevent loss. She had hidden the records in the building her enemies could enter, trusting cleverness where she needed witnesses and a bank vault. For 1 hour she considered Alfred's offer. Then Elsie brought Edwin's tracing cloth from the secret room, where Margaret had left it between slate templates. Soot had darkened one corner, but the line remained. What does an honest course mean? Elsie asked. Margaret looked at the drawn conduit. Edwin's cross-section showed the later retaining wall leaning 6 inches from vertical. A mason setting an arch beneath a known future load would not follow the distorted wall above. The honest course was the original geometry, the true line established before powerful men forced the structure out of shape. And a false springer might not be a bearing stone at all. It might only appear to bear. Margaret returned underground after installing additional shores. She stretched a fine cord between the conduit's original center points and used the slate templates to reconstruct the arch radius. Every genuine springer met the curve. One block on the northern side projected 3/4 of an inch but carried no corresponding pressure mark on the course above. Its exposed face was a thin stone plate. Behind it lay a copper tube. Inside, dry and green with age at the cap, were the executed 1857 Deed of Trust, conveying the lower quarry and its water rights to trustees for the contributing workers. A provisional patent receipt for the tram brake in the names of Beatrice Dunn and Joseph Bell, and a sealed declaration from Sir Claudius's junior clerk describing how Northmere altered the company accounts and accused Bell when he objected. The trust deed bore signatures, seals, and the names of two witnesses. One was Arthur Sennett. The other was Edwin Vale. Her father had witnessed the deed before fear made him silent. His 1860 survey and hidden tracing connected Bellweather's boundary to the conduit and the trust property. But the legal chain still required public records and living testimony. Paper found in a wall could be dismissed as planted, especially by a woman whom Northmere's agent already called unstable. Margaret left the copper tube in place. She summoned Mr. Beale, the constable, Pell, and Sennett before removing it. They watched her reconstruct the arch line and saw the sealed recess opened. Pell compared Edwin's signature with probate documents. Sennett identified his own and swore an affidavit concerning the execution of the deed and Bell's concealment of the records. "This proves a trust existed," Pell cautioned. "It does not by itself identify every beneficiary or defeat later registered conveyances." "Then we establish both," Margaret said. The setting book's contribution list had named families still in Brackencombe. Parish baptism, marriage, and burial registers could trace many descendants. Payroll books might prove the deductions. Land tax records could show when Northmere began treating the cooperative quarry as its own. The patent office could confirm the receipt. None of that would be quick. For the first time, Margaret did not try to do everything alone. She organized the work as she would a difficult wall. Separate loads, sound supports, no concealed weakness. Mr. Beale and the rector traced parish families. Pell wrote to the patent office and the county registry. Pike gathered sworn statements from former railway and quarrymen. Elsie copied names and dates in a careful hand. Margaret surveyed the hotel grounds and conduit, tying each boundary description to surviving stones and benchmarks. She also had to keep Bellweather. Mrs. Pike opened her spare room to Margaret's displaced lodger. Daniel advanced the cost of timber against future carting work. Margaret designed a temporary external stair, and 3 quarrymen erected it for ordinary wages deferred until spring, refusing charity but accepting her written accounts. By mid-January, 2 rooms were rentable again. She paid the next rate installment 4 days late, with Mr. Beale's recorded consent. The village's change was particular, not miraculous. The butcher extended 1 week's credit after Margaret strengthened his cracked lintel. The churchwarden defended her at the parish meeting because she had shown him the false notice. The innkeeper continued to predict failure and charged her full price for every meal. Margaret preferred this uneven respect to sudden admiration. It rested upon acts, not rumors of riches. Northmere struck through the law. The company filed for an injunction alleging trespass beneath the railway and demanded that the conduit be sealed. It produced an 1862 conveyance granting Sir Claudius the lower quarry outright. Pell found the document registered and facially valid. If the trust deed had priority, the later conveyance might be void. If the trust had lapsed or its trustees lacked authority, Northmere could prevail. Then Rusk produced Edwin's signed report stating that no service passage existed beneath the retaining wall. Margaret read it twice in Pell's office. The signature was genuine. The date was 3 days after Edwin's hidden survey. Her father had lied in writing. At the preliminary hearing in the county town, Northmere's barrister made Margaret's birth and sex part of the architecture of his case. She was described as a disappointed dependent who had broken into unsafe foundations to invent a claim against respectable owners. Edwin's false report undermined her survey. The magistrate ordered both parties to refrain from altering the passage and granted Northmere temporary control of the railway side entrance. Bellweather remained hers pending trial, but the company stationed a watchman at the retaining wall. Outside court, Rusk offered £30. "You have courage, Miss Reed. Courage is most valuable before it becomes ruin." "My name in the deed is Margaret Vale." A deed may call a ditch a river, it does not make it flow. She almost struck him. Instead, she noticed lime dust in the seam of his glove and a crescent cut on the leather, the shape left by the sharp cap of the zinc cylinder. Rusk had handled the stolen records.
"Hugh gave you the cylinder," she said. His pupils tightened. "Your brothers are learning that commerce rewards loyalty." That evening, Alfred appeared at Pell's office carrying the charred remains of Edwin's strongbox ledger. Hugh had confessed to setting the fire after Rusk refused to pay the full amount promised for the documents. Rusk took the zinc cylinder, then instructed Hugh to leave the Northmere match safe so suspicion could never rest securely on either man. Alfred had found the ledger hidden at the stoneworks. It recorded Rusk's payments to Hugh and an earlier payment from Northmere to Edwin in 1860, described as compensation for defective calculations. "A bribe," Margaret said. "Perhaps." Alfred looked older than he had at the funeral. "Hugh has fled to Liverpool. Northmere cancelled our order this morning. The bank will call the loan." Margaret felt no pleasure. 40 workmen had not set the fire or destroyed surveys. Yet she would not protect the firm by concealing evidence. She repeated her earlier terms. Alfred must surrender every remaining record, testify, and submit the books to independent accounting. The stoneworks could be reorganized under creditors' supervision, with workers paid before family dividends. Alfred resisted until she pointed to Edwin's deepest failure, the belief that preserving a business excused any silence. "He left us the consequences," she said. "We can leave something else." Alfred signed a statement. The stolen cylinder returned through a less expected conscience. 2 mornings later, Mrs. Miriam Rusk arrived at Bellweather in a hired carriage. She was Lionel's widowed sister-in-law and kept his household. He had placed the cylinder in her linen press after the fire, trusting that no constable would search a respectable woman's room. She had opened it and found a letter written by Beatrice Dunn to Miriam's grandfather, one of the quarry contributors. "Lionel told me the papers were forgeries made to extort the company," she said. "A forger could not have known the pet name my grandmother used for her father." The oilskin packets were intact. Rusk had removed one item, Joseph Bell's final letter, which referred to the company copy kept where arrivals are entered. Margaret remembered the abandoned hotel register. The volumes in the reception desk began only in 1861. The earlier books had supposedly been destroyed by damp. She examined the desk, a massive oak fitting built into the hall wall. Its pigeonholes measured 20 inches deep, but the exterior wall behind them allowed 27. A narrow discrepancy, easily dismissed as backing and plaster, concealed a vertical compartment released by pressing 2 wooden stops together. Inside stood the 1857 Bellweather guest register, its calfskin dry and its pages crowded with signatures. On 3 dates, the ordinary arrival columns gave way to minutes of meetings held by the B&D Cooperative Quarry. Each contributor had signed or marked attendance. The last entry recorded delivery of the executed trust deed to Joseph Bell and payment of the filing fee to Sir Claudius's junior clerk. Attached by ribbon was a duplicate receipt bearing the same number as the provisional patent document. More important, the inside cover contained a memorandum stating that Bellweather's original owner had granted the cooperative permanent access through the hotel conduit to the quarry's underground watercourse. That explained the strange 1848 boundary. The hotel did not own the railway, but it held an easement beneath it and an obligation to maintain access to the trust property. Pell's reply from London arrived the same day. The Patent Office ledger contained the matching receipt number, though the application had been abandoned after Bell vanished. The design had later appeared, with small modifications, in a Northmere patent registered under Sir Claudius's engineer. Beatrice's model and setting book could establish prior authorship. The mystery now had material, legal, and human layers. The lower quarry still contained valuable gritstone, but its greater promise lay in the watercourse that crossed beneath it. Beatrice's notes described a gravity-fed system intended to supply washing points at the quarry cottages and power the brake-testing incline. Pike remembered the pipe trenches being filled after Bell's disgrace. Brackencombe still drew water from shallow wells fouled each wet spring by runoff. The legacy was not a chest of wealth waiting to be spent. It was a trust cheated of land, a safety invention stolen from its makers, a water system never completed, and the truth about two people erased because their competence threatened a powerful man.
Joseph Bell's fate remained. After the magistrate permitted a supervised inspection, Margaret led a team into the failed eastern bay. They installed timber cribs and removed debris from above, never pulling stone from beneath an unsupported load. Beyond the drag marks, they found a collapsed pocket beside the water channel. Joseph's remains lay there, with a leather document case and a railway whistle. A fractured roof slab had killed him while he attempted to escape toward the station. The payroll money was not with him. The empty box had been placed in the chamber later to sustain the theft accusation. In the case was his unfinished report describing Northmere's fraud and instructing that any reward from the break be paid first to injured quarry families. Margaret did not display his bones as evidence at some theatrical confrontation. The coroner recorded the cause, the rector buried him under his own name, and the village placed Beatrice Dunn's name beside his on the stone. Justice began with accuracy. The full hearing took place in March 1878, 4 months after Edwin's burial. Northmere filled the public benches with clerks and managers. Brackencombe filled the remainder with quarry families carrying receipts, copied parish lines, and memories made precise under oath. Northmere's counsel attacked the trust deed as dormant and the hotel records as recent inventions. Pell answered with provenance rather than rhetoric. The witnessed removal of the copper tube, Senate's affidavit, the patent receipt matched to the London ledger, original inks and papers examined by 2 independent stationers, parish records identifying surviving beneficiaries, Bellweather's 1848 deed establishing passage rights, and land tax entries showing that Sir Claudius did not claim the lower quarry until after Bell disappeared. Margaret testified last. A large drawing of the conduit and retaining wall stood beside her. Rusk's counsel asked how a woman without formal engineering credentials could contradict Edwin Vale's signed report. "I do not ask the court to prefer my sex or my affection," she said. "I ask it to examine measurements." She demonstrated how the slate templates reconstructed the original arch, how Edwin's hidden survey matched physical benchmarks, and how his public report omitted 13 feet of hotel width and the conduit visible from within that space. His lie could not erase the masonry he had measured. His witness signature on the earlier trust deed showed why Northmere had leverage over him. Admitting the passage later would expose his silence. Then she joined 3 clues Northmere had treated separately. The 1 long 2 short chisel mark identified Edwin's concealed survey chamber. The template numbers led to the mason's store. The honest course in Beatrice's setting book identified the false springer by true geometry. None depended on chance, and all existed before Margaret owned Bellweather. Alfred testified to Rusk's letter, Hugh's theft, and the offered payments. Miriam Rusk identified the stolen cylinder and her family letter. The constable produced the forged evacuation notice and the Northmere match safe, not as conclusive proof alone, but as part of the chain. Rusk's flaw was his certainty that everyone could be controlled by money or shame. He had entrusted incriminating papers to a woman he regarded as furniture and recruited a debtor who became desperate when cheated. The judge ordered the lower quarry and water rights preserved under the 1857 trust, pending formal appointment of new trustees. Northmere's later conveyance was declared subject to the earlier interest. The company was enjoined from quarrying or blocking the passage and required to account for profits derived from the property. The patent claim was referred for separate proceedings, but Northmere agreed within weeks to pay compensation rather than expose decades of license. Rusk was charged with receiving stolen property and conspiracy in the fire. Hugh was arrested at Liverpool docks after Alfred disclosed his destination. Hugh's confession and cooperation reduced but did not erase his punishment. Alfred lost control of Vale & Sons under the bank's restructuring agreement. Margaret did not ask the law to turn cruel men into repentant ones. She asked it to make their actions costly and their victims whole. The trust's recovery did not make Margaret personally rich. Bellweather belonged to her, but the quarry and compensation belonged to the beneficiaries. The newly appointed trustees included Margaret, Pike, the rector, Mrs. Rusk, and 2 elected descendants of contributors. Their first accounts paid legal costs, stabilized the quarry, and established small pensions for 3 surviving injured workers. The rest funded a cautious plan. Beatrice's brake model was tested by an independent mechanical engineer who confirmed its priority and practical value. Rather than sell it outright, the trustees licensed the improved design at modest rates and used the income for the waterworks. They reopened only the quarry's safest western face under a cooperative lease. Orders went first to local builders, including the reorganized Vale Stoneworks, but no firm received preference without fair prices and written safety conditions. Margaret insisted that Alfred's men should not starve for his decisions. She also insisted that Alfred work under an elected manager and receive a salary instead of unquestioned profits. He accepted because the alternative was closure. Their relationship did not heal through one apology. It changed by inches, like a wall brought back to line through repeated, measured pressure. Months later, he began addressing her as Margaret before customers. A year passed before he admitted that her drawings had kept the firm solvent more than once. Bellweather demanded slower labor. A survey showed that replacing the entire roof would cost £56. Margaret did not pretend trust money could be used for her private property. She retained income from lodgers, took commissions for farm and cottage repairs, and negotiated a loan secured only after the eastern rooms produced steady rent. During the first spring, workers repaired the service wing and installed sound gutters. That summer, they rebuilt the external stair in stone. The central roof waited until the following year. The hotel's useful future emerged from its old purpose. Road surveyors, quarry buyers, and mechanics needed lodging. Margaret opened 6 rooms, then 9. The dining room became an evening classroom twice a week. Elsie learned measured drawing and bookkeeping there before apprenticing under Margaret. 2 quarrymen's daughters joined her, one skilled with figures and the other with carving. No rule announced that girls must become masons. The tools and instructions simply ceased to be withheld from them. The water system required 18 months. Beatrice's surviving notes gave gradients, but not every route, and parts of the old trench crossed disputed gardens. The trustees purchased easements rather than claiming moral entitlement. Pike supervised pipe laying. A covered reservoir above the cottages fed 3 public pumps and a wash house by gravity. During the first heavy autumn rain, the spring water remained clear, while the shallow wells turned brown. People who had once mocked Bellweather gathered with buckets beneath the pump spout. Margaret watched Mrs. Pike fill a kettle without straining mud through cloth. That ordinary act gave the legacy its proper scale. The value hidden beneath the hotel had never been the quarry alone. It was the ability of work done by forgotten hands to reduce the daily burden of people not yet born. Not everyone revised the past. The innkeeper declared that public pumps encouraged loitering. One farmer refused trust water because his grandfather had called Bell a thief. Margaret did not require unanimous gratitude. Evidence could correct a public record. It could not command every private heart. Arthur Sennett lived long enough to see Joseph Bell's name cleared in the railway minutes. At the dedication of the wash house, he asked Margaret to read aloud a letter from Bell's daughter Anne, traced to York through parish records. Anne had spent most of her life believing her father abandoned the family with stolen money. She came to Brackencoombe in a black bonnet and stood beside his grave without speaking for a long while. The trustees offered her compensation due to Bell's heirs. She accepted enough to support her widowed daughter and placed the remainder into the Injured Workers' Pension Fund, as her father's last report requested. Beatrice Dunn had died in obscurity in Leeds, repairing counting machines and never marrying. Margaret found a former apprentice who preserved 2 of her notebooks. Copies went into a locked, dry archive at Bellweather, while the originals were deposited with the county. A small brass plate in the hall named Beatrice as designer and Joseph as organizer. Edwin's name appeared beneath theirs as witness and later surveyor, followed by the truth. He preserved evidence after failing to reveal it publicly. Pell questioned that wording. Your father did intend restitution. Intention is part of the truth, Margaret said. So is delay. She no longer needed Edwin to become either villain or secret hero. He had taught her a craft with generosity, denied her publicly with cowardice, and finally left her the means to complete a duty he had postponed. Loving him did not require disguising the shape of his failure. 2 years after Margaret entered Bellweather with 7 shillings, the front veranda stood straight again. It was not restored to fashionable grandeur. Reused iron columns bore tiny differences in their scrollwork. The stone steps retained worn hollows, and one section of smoke-darkened wall remained visible behind glass in the classroom. Margaret wanted the building to show repair, not pretend it had never been injured. On a pale November morning, she climbed to room 12 with Elsie, now 17 and carrying her own folding rule. The false door had been preserved. Beyond it, the narrow survey chamber held mounted copies of the conduit drawings and the slate-arch templates. Visitors often looked for treasure and seemed disappointed by measured lines, receipts, and a wooden brake. They expect gold, Elsie said. Gold is easier to recognize. Below them, a wagon from the cooperative quarry rolled along the restored western road. Its brake engaged at the slope with a firm mechanical click. In the yard, children filled cans from the new branch pipe. Alfred waited by the entrance with an estimate requiring Margaret's approval. Mrs. Pike's bread cooled in the kitchen, and 2 travelers argued amiably over the last room. Margaret set a plumb line against the once bowed wall. The repaired masonry had settled less than 1/8 of an inch through the year. She showed Elsie how to record the movement in the maintenance book, then handed her the pencil. The line hung freely, answering gravity rather than reputation. Around it, Bellweather carried the marks of everyone who had helped bring it back into use. New lime beside old stone, careful joints where fire had opened wounds, and thresholds worn again by purposeful feet. Margaret had inherited a ruin because her family believed worthless things belonged together. By measuring what others ignored, she had learned that restoration was not the recovery of some flawless former state. It was the patient making of a structure honest enough to bear a future.